Over the next few weeks, we're going to cover everything about planting design, how to select plants, how to propagate a whole mass of them, and how you can even create beauty in small spaces so everyone can have a year of wonder, no matter what kind of garden you're growing in. But today, it's all about planting. I'm a maximalist. We want to cram all different kinds of plants, all different kinds of forms of plants, so that we can have this amazing kind of schedule of different flowers and interests throughout the whole year. When I first planted out my front yard, it was filled with perennials. They mainly flowered in the summer. This time I want to experiment so much more. Add more bulbs, more Australian wildflowers, different kinds of annuals and succulents to really have much more wonder throughout the whole year. And I started by ripping it all up. Now it looks drastic, but don't be alarmed. All these plants were lifted, they're going to elsewhere in the garden, to projects, to friends. We've collected seeds and cuttings, and so everything's going to be used. When you're first thinking about a planting design, it's great to really observe the garden, to spend some time in the space, to consider some of the natural parameters, some of the things that you want to keep in the space, and also thinking about how you're going to see it and use the space. Now, when I ripped everything out, there are some things that I left. I've left the magnolias, which are an incredible backdrop to the garden. The hedges that create some formal lines for all the wild planting that happens in between. There's an existing gravel pathway, and I marked out all of these bulbs with some bamboo stakes so I can see where they are when we do the planting. And there's some gorgeous grasses. They're really nice and established. They have lovely texture on the outskirts of the garden, so we've kept them. The other important thing to consider is the lines of beauty. So how you see across the garden, the different perspectives and views that you have on the garden. What will greet you when you come up the driveway? The conditions and size are also something you need to think about. So this is a typical garden front yard, about 6 by 10 metres. It's also important to think about your aspect. So how much sun the garden actually gets throughout the day. This garden is predominantly south-facing, but I still get a lot of sunlight because the garden's far enough away from the house. Once you've got a handle on the conditions, the next step is to really start developing that idea. For me, with this particular planting design, I really want to create something that is full of flowers, that's really complex, but that it's got a real softness to it as well. I really want, you know, all the flowers, all the foliage to really pick up the golden hour light as the sun sets and as the sun rises in the morning. There's particular colours that I really love and particular shapes of flowers that I want to use a lot of so that it really feels like an immersive space where I'm just surrounded by all these floating flowers. When I'm doing planting design, I consider colour, I consider shape, and I consider the phenology of the plant. So when it's flowering, when it's growing, I consider all of those things at the same time. But I think it might be a bit more simpler if we just think about colour first and then shape and how we can combine them together. When I think about colour, I really feel like it's one of the most important things in a garden. For me, like, colour is something that just brings everything to life. You can use colour in so many different ways, and it brings vibrancy, or if it brings softness, it can bring a whole planting together. It can create contrast. When it comes to developing your colour experience for your garden, I think it's really fun to create like a visual tool. Sometimes we call these mood boards, but there's different ways of going about them. I really like taking screenshots from my camera roll. I find that when I'm out in nature or in gardens, I've been drawn to particular colours, and so I can see those different themes come through in what I've documented on my phone. There's other ways as well. You can create like a physical mood board where you clip out all different kinds of colours and textures and things that you really feel drawn to, the things that you really, really love. And it's possible to also create like a digital pin board as well, where you get a whole collection of images and you really start seeing kind of an idea of colour come through it. I really love beautiful kind of autumnal colours. You know, the oranges, the burgundies, but also the lime greens. And I really love like mauves as well, and that's something that we see in the Australian bush a lot, together with yellows. And so I always think about the colours that I want to see at particular points in time. And there is a really lovely combination that I really want to explore in the garden this year. I got so inspired by this image in looking at all of the gorgeous Echinacea pallida, and it's fun to use some of your favourite plants, and Echinaceas are definitely one of mine, but how it just pairs so beautifully with this soft mauve in the background. And so I'm really taking a lot of inspiration from this kind of colour and how I can have a moment of that in my garden, but potentially, instead of using just these plants, use some Australian wildflowers to really make it happen. So to make it simple, for this planting in my front garden, I'm going to work with 3 main shapes. So larger things like the larger perennials like Cedar matrona that form lots of big mounds. And then I'm going to use a lot of plants that have a lot of floating flowers. They might be strappy, upright. Those flowers will come up through and they'll float above the remaining foliage. And then I'm going to have like a lot of filler as well. So lower grasses, ground covers that will use all the space in between these 2 different shapes. Now I've got a really clear idea of colour, I'm going to use shape and form to start building a plant list of those favourite plants and other plants that are really going to complement them. And as I do so, I'm also going to think about who else this garden is for. So those pollinators, the bees, the birds, all the other creatures that are going to live in my garden, I'm going to think about them and the kind of plants that they love too. So don't hesitate if you want to have a bit of a crack, rip something up and start your planting design again. Gardening and plants, it's all about fun, experimenting, really maximising all the delight and the wonder that you can fit into a space. So it doesn't matter whether you've got a really big front yard, something in the backyard, some pots, a little small corner. Why don't you explore what you can achieve with some beautiful plants all together in your home garden? Next time in my Designing with Plants series, I'll show you how to pick plants that will fill your garden year-round with colour, texture and of course beauty.